Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. Last week, I ran an episode that I recorded in a hotel room because I felt like the message had to be shared. I talked about canceling the 125-mile race that I was scheduled to run. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, go back to it because it was pretty well received by our No Days Off Nation. A lot of our listeners let me know when what I'm saying makes sense and has an impact, and that is one I definitely got some feedback on. So you might want to go listen to it if you haven't yet. Today's episode is sort of a part two to that, but I want to be really clear. This part two isn't because I think I need to justify the decision I made, because I don't. I'm feeling great about it. This part two is because I think that decision revealed something a little bit bigger based on the feedback I've been receiving. Something that maybe the No Days Off Nation, every entrepreneur, every leader, every parent, every high performer, I think it's something that every one of those individuals has to wrestle with at some point. And that is, when is changing your mind wisdom? And when is changing your mind actually weakness? As I've been thinking quite a bit around this, I think there's a real fine line there. There is a version of changing your mind that is, call it what it is, it's just avoidance. It is quitting because it got hard. It is backing out because the work became inconvenient. It's walking away because maybe the emotional cost is too high. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the other version, the more, I guess for lack of a better word, mature version. The version where you step back, you look at all the facts, you look at the cost, you look at the mission, you look at maybe what has changed, and then you ask yourself, honestly, knowing what I now know, would I choose this again? Knowing what I now know, would I choose this again? And I think it's a pretty powerful question. It's also a pretty dangerous question because if you ask it honestly, you might not like the answer. High performers, like many of you, are usually very good at commitment. It's usually considered one of your gifts. Like, you commit to something and you finish it. You endure, you persevere, you keep promises. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need everything to feel good. You don't need anybody cheering for you or everyone cheering for you. You just put your head down and you keep moving. And that is, to be clear, that is a strength. But for every strength we have, there's also a shadow side to it, if you want to call it that. And the shadow side of commitment is a bit of stubbornness. I can only speak for me, but I think my commitment sometimes is a side of stubbornness. Sometimes we become so committed to finishing what we started that we stop asking ourselves whether it still makes sense. We become loyal to a decision long after the decision has stopped being an intelligent one. We keep throwing money at things because we committed to it. We keep the wrong person in the seat within the company because we've already put some money into them. We've already invested our time with them. We care about them. We keep running the same play because we're the ones that called it. Maybe we stay in the wrong partnership because leaving would be messy. And then we keep chasing goals because we announced them. We announced them maybe publicly, and we don't want to look inconsistent. And I think that's where leaders really get in trouble. And it has nothing to do with lacking discipline. It has to do with confusing discipline with refusing to take a step back and reassess. And there's a big difference between those two. Discipline says, hey, this is hard, but it still matters. Stubbornness says, this no longer makes sense, but I don't want to admit it. There's a big difference there. That is the line. I think that is the distinction. I think one of the most underrated leadership skills is having the courage to change your mind when the facts have changed, or when the objective or the mission has changed, or maybe even when you have changed. Because changing your mind is not always a lack of commitment. Sometimes it's actually a deeper commitment. It's a commitment to a truth versus your ego, right? It's a commitment to the overall mission versus just the plan. Business history is full of examples of leaders who had to do this. I think one that you always hear about, or at least I always hear about, maybe I'm picking up books that always have this story in it, but it's about Intel. And most of us think of Intel as a microprocessor company, chips and processors, the stuff that helped power the PC revolution, the personal computer revolution. But Intel did not start with that identity. Intel actually started as a memory company. This was not a side project. That was not some random division inside the company. That was the entire company's identity. It was a memory company. Memory chips were what Intel was known for. That was the business they had built. But by the mid 80s, 1980s, that business was really under intense pressure. They had tremendous competition from the Japanese companies, and those Japanese companies were producing memory chips that were better and cheaper, and Intel was in a real bind. That business that had made them successful was becoming the business that might limit their entire future. And that created a really difficult moment for their leadership team. Because when that one thing that had made them so successful was no longer doing that, they had to make a decision whether to walk away from it. And that's really, really, really hard. I mean, it's one thing to quit something that has never worked. That's emotionally a lot easier. It's a lot harder to walk away from something that used to work. Because now you're not just changing a strategy, you're actually needing to change your identity. And that's what Intel had to do. Andy Grove, its leader, had to face that moment. And Grove asked Gordon Moore, who was another partner of his, a pretty well-known question, a famous question. He basically said, hey, if the board fired us and brought in a new CEO, what would that person do? I actually think I've asked that question in an episode here. We have an episode somewhere in the past 800 or so where that was the topic. If we brought in a new CEO, what would that person do? Well, Andy Grove had asked his partner, Gordon Moore, that question. And Gordon Moore said they would get us out of the memory business. And Andy Grove responded with the obvious, but I guess courageous follow-up. Then why don't we walk out the door, come back in and do it ourselves? And that question, it totally changed Intel. They shifted away from memory and they moved towards microprocessors. And that defined the entire next era of the company. Think about how hard that must have been. Like they had to stop saying, this is who we are. And then they had to start asking, hey, where is the future pulling us? That takes a lot of courage to change your mind in that manner. And as business owners, all of you that are listening, you face versions of this all the time. Maybe not at the scale of Intel. You might not have billions of dollars at stake, but the principle is still pretty much the same. I mean, you built your business a certain way. You grew it through, say, a certain lead source. You hired a certain kind of person. You ran a certain model. And you became known for a certain thing. And then the world changes, the market changes, the customer changes, economics change, your own goals change. But instead of reassessing, a lot of leaders just keep dragging the old model forward. And why do they do that? Because it used to work. And because if we admit that it no longer works, we also have to admit that a part of our old identity has expired. And that's pretty damn hard. But it is necessary. Netflix is another good example of this. They built an incredible business mailing DVDs to people's homes. And if you are around as long as I've been, you remember when Netflix was mailing DVDs. Their customers were loving it. The company was growing. The business made a lot of sense. But Netflix leadership understood something important, and that was that the future was not going to be built around mailing these discs through the postal service. Now, Netflix got ahead of this, and I think that's where a lot of companies miss it. A lot of companies would wait until the old model is pretty obviously dead, when revenue is tanking, or when the market forces them to make a change. Netflix started moving towards streaming while the DVD business still had some life in it. So I think that kind of decision is even harder, right? Because their hand was not forced. They made a decision to start investing in a new line of business being streaming while the DVD business was still prosperous. I mean, when something's broken, change is pretty darn obvious, but when something's still working, change requires a real vision. So Netflix had to more or less disrupt itself before its competition did. And I think that's an amazing job by its leadership. The old business was paying the bills. The old model was feeding the company. There was support for the old way, but the new way, with all of its uncertainty, knowing that it might not work at first and the technology not being ready for it and the customers not really understanding it, that took some real guts. And the leadership team had to see around the corner. They had to see what's next. I think it's a great lesson for every one of our entrepreneurs here. The best time to change your mind is often before you're actually forced to do it. It's while the old thing is working. If the future is telling you that the model has a shelf life, I think you got to listen. And many of you are in businesses right now and industries right now. When you know your model has a shelf life, you need to get ahead of it. And that could be something specific to your marketing or how you're recruiting people or the technology you're using or the way you're actually structured your business. It could be true about how you lead. A lot of leaders do not change until the pain is obvious. So just a couple examples to think around as we talk about changing our mind and the courage required to do it. I think that Intel and Netflix are both really, really great examples of that scenario. So here's what I'm thinking about. For you today. I want you to take a look at your business right now. Look at your world right now. And I want you to ask yourself, if a new CEO walked in that door and took your place, what is the first move he or she might make? So you're fired, a new CEO walks in, and they take your place. What's the first thing that they might do? What's the first move they might make? Now, based on your answer to that, it then begs the question, why are you not taking those action steps that this new CEO would be taking? Odds are it's because you're comfortable. Odds are it's because making a change is really, really hard, but it takes courage. It takes courage to quit something in this way. But I want to challenge everybody here at the No Days Off podcast, the No Days Off Nation, to do those hard things because that's what's going to separate you from the rest of the pack. That's all I have for you today, the No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.